Kitchen Nightmares.
Kitchen Nightmares.
Truly, the thinking man's TV show. Each episode, world-renowned chef and restaurateur Gordon Ramsay goes across America looking for its greatest diners, drive-ins, and dives. What other show combines dumb people, disgusting food, and angry chefs all in one binge-worthy package? Now, there are plenty of compilation lists out there featuring the worst or most disgusting episodes, but I wanted to focus on just one person who I think is overall the worst person featured on all 7 seasons of the show. David Leonard of the Black Pearl.
Since we didn't want to spend any of our own money.
Why this guy, you might be asking yourself? After all, you got plenty to choose from. You got your disgusting owners who don't clean, owners with Napoleon complexes, owners who obviously have undiagnosed mental illnesses, owners who started their business by literally stealing $250,000 worth of inheritance from their own children, which was willed to them by their deceased crime lord grandfather,
What the hell is he here for?
and the ones that will not be named. Ever since watching that episode as a young kid, when it first aired in 2008, David stood out to me the moment he showed up. Just look at how he meets Gordon for the first time.
Is that one of the owners? Yes, it is. Excellent.
He just has this unmistakable aura of, I know I'm better than you. He walks in with the confidence of a multi-millionaire or a James Bond villain, not an owner of a failing lobster shack. Now, after thinking about it for longer than any normal person would, I believe that the reason why David is the worst person featured on the show can be broken down into 2 qualities: arrogance and ungratefulness. Now, those 2 qualities aren't unique to David. There have been a lot of people featured on the show who think that they know better than Gordon Ramsay, or don't appreciate the work that Ramsay is doing for them.
I'm insane, you're insane!
You can't even be
You're
fucking
fucking
true.
insane! That refrigerator was...
But David has those 2 aspects cranked to 10. So, what do I mean when I say David is the most arrogant person ever featured on the show? I mean that he thinks that literally everything he does is right, and everyone else is hopelessly wrong. Throughout the episode, it's clear that he thinks everyone is less intelligent than him. You can even hear it every time he talks to his staff, or Gordon.
I'm really nervous now. I've never known a chef that's not allowed to season his food. Is this man your chef or is he your puppet?
No, he's my chef. David has this tone of being condescending and knowing it all.
Talking down to them in this sort of playful voice, like he's talking to a child. He argues with the customers.
You had the clam bake, and there was a problem with the mussels or the steamers?
Both, they're terribly sand.
Yeah, there should be sand in the steamer. There often is, and that's why you have the broth to dip them in. So what would you like instead of those?
Nothing. In fact, I'll just eat the lobster. I'm fine.
Okay, it'll be right out.
His staff.
Why haven't we got aprons?
They know where the aprons are. They just don't choose to wear them.
But why can't you say it's policy to be in an apron?
Kat, it's policy for you not to have a drink here after your shift, but you often do.
And most of all, Gordon.
This is real for me. And for you, it's an image.
I disagree with you on almost everything you said.
You do?
Yeah, I do.
Why do you disagree?
Because you're wrong. The great Gordon Ramsay is wrong.
Now, I'm not going to put Gordon Ramsay on a pedestal and say that he's this infallible pillar of knowledge that can do no wrong, and what he says is the law. He is, at the end of the day, just a person, and he can make mistakes. But the guy has dozens of restaurants, half a dozen Michelin stars, and a few decades of experience under his belt. So you can probably bet that he has a good idea of how to run a place. Even some of the most arrogant owners featured on the show at least entertained the notion of some of Ramsay's improvements, or were at the very least excited by the decor changes, but not David.
David, what do you think?
The column should be yellow. Everything's reorganized. It's, it's another way to do it.
David.
Does it blow me away? No. You taste the ceviche?
It's so good.
Not very good. I don't like it. I don't like that shrimp thing either. I don't really like that.
It almost seems like he goes out of his way to be negative when interacting with Gordon. The one time he actually agrees with him is when they finally decide which of the 3 co-owners should be the head manager. Even then, you could tell from his face that he's not actually happy with the entire thing.
For that cry of help, rather than having to massage your own egos.
I think Greg would be a perfect general manager. I don't know if I have more faith in Greg. So if Greg succeeds, that'll be great.
And I'm willing to bet that he doesn't actually care about who the head manager is, but he's more upset that no one voted for him. Just look at how he treats his own staff when they bring up their concerns in a non-confrontational way.
Why can't you ask my question without a question?
I did answer your question.
You did?
David, show the girl some respect, will you? You're great at beating around the bush, you know that?
No.
Huh? In front of everybody, why can't you answer the question?
Thought I did answer the question.
Rather than trying to be such a smart ass and answer
Thought I
another
did
question.
answer the question.
Do you know what I've just discovered? You're so full of you'd make a great politician, you know that?
There's really no two ways about it. Throughout the entire episode, he was just incredibly negative about everything that Gordon tries to do. From the decor changes, lobster tank, advertising, and menu. Oh, I forgot to mention, Gordon gets them this lobster tank claw machine. You can go in and try to catch a lobster, and if you win, they cook the thing in. You know, it's fun, you know, it's entertaining, it's interesting. As soon as they finished filming, David removed it. It seems as if David is willing to let the business fail just to spite Gordon, which really begs the question, why did you even invite him in the first place if you're not willing to listen to anything he says? Although, to be fair, that does seem to be a common thread with most episodes of Kitchen Nightmares. Gordon gets invited to some car crash of a restaurant, and when he starts making critiques, it always turns into, who the fuck is this guy? He don't know nothing. I've been in this business for 30 years. I've been making Italian food since I could barely walk out. My mama just has her tears in the sauce. Now, the most frustrating scene to me was the argument about the lobsters.
David.
Yeah.
You tell me about the passion with the Maine lobster. Are you aware that the lobsters in your fridge are Canadian?
Same waters, North Atlantic waters.
You're telling me now a Canadian lobster, half the price of a Maine lobster, is the same taste and flavor? There's a big difference. I can't get Maine lobsters.
That's right, so they get them from Canada.
I'm using Canadian lobsters.
That's right, that's what they do. But
But I don't advertise them as Maine.
Tell me, is it a different animal?
Maine is a Canadian lobster for you.
Well, Martis americanus, same animal, right?
Holy.
I'm asking you a question.
What you're trying to dictate to me is that you're selling Maine lobster. They're not from Maine.
Well, it comes from the same vendor.
Holy.
Now, I'm not a chef. I don't claim to be a chef. I know very little about lobster species, but regardless of what type of lobster it is, you can't advertise one product and then sell a different, cheaper product. Alright, if I went to a restaurant and I wanted to splurge and celebrate by buying a nice, high-end cut of steak and drop upwards of $50 to $100 for the entire meal, I expect a good quality dry-aged steak, not something that I could buy myself at Walmart. So to literally no one's surprise, immediately after they finish shooting the show, the owners undo literally all the changes that Gordon Ramsay made to the decor, menu, staffing, etc.
What happened?
Everything kind of went back to the way that it was. The menu slowly reverted back to the old menu.
No.
The Black Pearl eventually closed its doors for good on September 29th, 2008, only 4 days after the episode was aired. But before he completely condemned David, you're going to be shocked by how he handled the closure. Now, a few days after the Black Pearl closes, David apologized to Gordon Ramsay for his behavior throughout the entire debacle. He states that he was so wrapped up in the idea that his restaurant, and by extension his legacy, was being attacked by Gordon, that he lashed out the way he did, even admitting that his childish behavior and how he treated his staff and Gordon was unprofessional, and that it wasn't Chef Ramsay's fault that the Black Pearl failed, but was a combination of lack of experience in the restaurant industry and overconfidence on his part, as well as his partners, and that losing the Black Pearl snapped him out of that bubble of self-importance that he had. He proceeded to thank Gordon Ramsay for taking the time to try and salvage the Black Pearl, and wished him the best on future restaurants. A shockingly classy and respectable ending for an otherwise despicable and unlikable owner. David did a complete 180 and actually owned up to his faults and admitted his own shortcomings, a rarity for the show's 80+ episodes. Just kidding, he blamed everything on Gordon Ramsay and ranted about how much he sucks. Hello everyone. Well, after 3 years, we have fried our last clam and shucked our last oyster. On October 1st, we sold our lease and fixtures to someone who may be better equipped to handle the exceedingly high cost of doing business in New York City. As you may know, in February, we filmed an episode of Kitchen Nightmares at our restaurant hoping for the best. We were naive, believing that the show was at least somewhat honest. We truly felt we could learn something from that jerk. From the beginning, it was clear that the show was a joke. From the very first day they were initiated, the changes Gordon Ramsay made were ridiculed by the press, hated by our regular customers, and were the direct cause of a 50% drop in revenues. KN is simply a series of setups staged to illustrate situations that fit their script, and as you would expect, their expert editors tell only half the story, the part that makes their star shine brightest. All of my brilliant and pointed comebacks were left on the cutting room floor. Darn the luck. In fact, Gordo's menu changes were horrible and mirrored the buffet offerings of a cruise ship from the 1950s. His innovations had nothing to do with our concept of a New England lobster shack, something he clearly knows nothing about. For God's sake, he thinks the Canadian and Maine lobster are two different species. Maybe he thinks Canadian lobsters have an accent. Butter, eh? Jesus Christ, it's so fucking cringy. Finally, his big design change, the Lobster arcade game, was nothing short of asinine. After the film grand reopening dinner, attended by actors we learned who responded to the producer's Craigslist ad and were instructed to order the new Gordon Ramsay special, served us right for allowing a potty-mouthed teabag to mess with our New England cuisine. We should have taken a page out of history, revolted, and sent him packing and bleeding back to King George. Anyway, enough sour grapes. While I hope Gordo meets an untimely death so that I can dance on his grave, it is time to move on. Now, it's not entirely unheard of for restaurants that were on the show to make negative comments about Gordon after filming is finished. One guy even tried to sue Gordon Ramsay for $3 million because they made him look bad, but my god, I didn't think anyone went as far as to wish death on the guy just because he said your food was crap. David had his one shot here to turn everything around and end on a good note. Just imagine how respectable he would have been if instead of calling Gordon Ramsay an asshole, he instead thanked his staff members for everything. Less than 2% of the entire closing message was made thanking his staff or his fellow owners. The rest of it was insulting Gordon Ramsay and his show. Also, David, you aren't as witty as you think you are. There's probably a good reason they left all your brilliant and pointed comebacks on the cutting room floor.
My advice is for him to get his partners, get your money out, yeah, and disappear.
Yeah, all right, well, my advice would be for you to disappear, and the sooner the better.
But wait, there's more. So around 2009, allegations that Gordon Ramsay had been having an affair surfaced, and wouldn't you know it, a certain seafood shack had something to say about the whole situation. News. As it turns out, Gordon Ramsay is allegedly a philandering hypocrite. Maybe he'll rot in hell where he belongs. For now, Ramsay maintains that he did not cheat on his wife, saying he was set up, and went so far to pose for photos with his wife Tana yesterday outside their home. However, if it is true, we find it interesting how Marriott seems to be the top for affairs. Thank you to our friends and family for your support during the past 4 years, and thank you God for exposing this asswipe. Gee, I wonder who could have possibly made this post. Keep in mind, at this point, the Black Pearl has been closed for half a year. David resurrected his failed restaurant's website just to hurl some petty insults at Ramsay while he's going through a messy scandal. Not only that, it seems like he's even angrier this time around. You would think that after half a year he would calm down a bit, but it seems like David just spent that time stewing over Gordon. Imagine being David in his home for 6 months, getting angrier and angrier over what happened. At this point, Gordon himself has likely forgotten who David even is, and as his successes keep piling up higher and higher, David's own inadequacies weigh down on him more. The stinging words and mocking attitude of Gordon gnawing away at him constantly. Every time he has an accomplishment or a moment of happiness, the knowledge that Gordon Ramsay was right brings him back down. David's friends all know about it too, how could they not? The idea that they would be talking behind his back about him would have eroded his self-esteem, this fear eventually bleeding out into everyday interactions with strangers. The thought of being stopped on the street and being identified as that one lobster asshole from Kitchen Nightmares, putting him in a cold sweat every time he steps outside. David hearing about Ramsay's affair scandals must have overjoyed him, because even if for a single insignificant moment, he can have his turn at twisting the dagger bird in Ramsay's back. So, what's David doing now? Well, before the whole Black Pearl thing, he was a musician, and it seems he's back at it again. He even has a website for it, a very 1990s website that should probably be viewed with a Netscape browser. But you know what? The music isn't half bad. It has a very boomer-esque quality to it. I can see myself listening to it while enjoying wings at my local wing spot. David should have just stuck with that to begin with. Look at how happy he is. He's not even overtly wishing death on anyone. So, what can you take away from all this? Be more thankful to those who are willing to help you. Be more self-aware of your own shortcomings as a person and a leader. Don't open a seafood restaurant in the middle of New York if you've never worked in a kitchen before. I don't know. If you want a moral to the story, then you're watching the wrong video. And honestly, does it even matter whether some random jerk is the worst person featured on the show or not? The closure rate of all the restaurants featured on Kitchen Nightmares stands at 78%. David could have been the kindest, most experienced person on the show, and there is still a pretty good chance that he would have been shut down. Regardless, you have to admit that starting your own business takes a lot of guts, and it's easy for people to criticize what went wrong with the benefit of hindsight and a lack of personal investment clouding their judgment. Can any of us really say with absolute certainty that we wouldn't make idiotic mistakes like David if we were put in his position as one of the owners of a restaurant facing imminent closure? But bottom line, is David an asshole? Yes. Am I a jackass for making a video on him? Definitely. Thanks for watching, everyone.
David is full.